Good evening and welcome to EmpowerU. We've got 6 speakers tonight, so I'm going to make this really short and sweet so we can get started. I just want to mention a couple things before I go over a few of our classes. The speakers will not be taking questions tonight unless they finish before their 15-minute allotted time. So if they have extra time, we'll let them take questions. Otherwise, there won't be any. If you do have a question and we do get to take it, please raise your hand and wait for one of us to bring a microphone to you so everybody can hear that question. And also, if you're new here tonight, I just want to let you know that we are a free university. We run by donations only. So towards the end of our class, we always pass around our little red buckets. We appreciate any donation that you might like to give to help us keep these kinds of things going. Tomorrow night, we have a class called Saying Goodbye to Vietnam. And Ken Williamson was an Army photographer in Vietnam. He has put together a book of his experience there. He talks about the Vietnamese people. He talks about our troops that were there. And he also talks about his own experience. He has lots of pictures as well. So it should be a really interesting class. I hope you'll be here. Next Tuesday, we have the story of Reagan Tokes. Reagan Tokes was an Ohio University student who left school one day. I'm not sure of all the story, but after leaving school one day, she was kidnapped, she was raped, and she was murdered. And this all occurred by a convicted felon who had on an ankle bracelet. And I think all of us feel like we're pretty safe. If somebody has a bracelet on, they're being monitored. Well, Reagan Tokes' mother learned that wasn't the case. This man was not being monitored. Her mother's going to be here on Tuesday. She's coming up from Florida. She's going to talk about this case. She's also going to have a gentleman with her, Rob Fletcher, who's going to be giving tips on how to look out for yourself, things that you can do, and that sort of thing. So I hope you'll come to that class as well. And then next Thursday, we have About the Debt, and that's our own Dan Reginald is going to be the teacher for that. And I'm going to let him tell you about that because he knows more about it than I do. So before we get started, Dan's going to come up. We're going to have our drawing, so get out your tickets.
Get your lucky tickets, everyone. Okay, so tonight's prize, following our book trail, is really one of my favorite writers from the Wall Street Journal, Kimberly Strassel. She's wonderful. If you have ever seen her, she's on a program called Washington Week in Review. No, what's the program at 3 o'clock on the weekends, which is a great program. But she's a great writer, and this book is called Resistance. So I'm going to ask one of our guest speakers to draw a lucky number. Well, we just wouldn't let you win. 315. Who's number 315? Nick Noel. Let's give Nick, our 4th speaker, a round of applause, everyone. I've got an interesting article I'm going to pass out to you tonight at the end of the class. It's something that's very much in the news, and it's an article on where the wealth tax has failed. Whether you're wealthy or not, this whole new kind of taxation that's could be put upon us is serious. And the problem is it's going to be a part of my class, which talks about the debt and the deficit and other upcoming landmines next Thursday. I hope you'll all come and listen to what I have to say. But the wealth tax is a big part of it. And so many of these programs that we're hearing about, like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal and reparations and this program over here called Cancel the Student Debt, they all revolve around models that in many cases just can't hold up. That's going to be a lot of what I'm going to talk about next Thursday. So when you leave, grab this article called Where Wealth Taxes Have Failed. They've never succeeded. So when you hear about the great programs that people plan, this article will be your ammunition. A couple other things I wanted to share with you. Mr. Janis is here tonight with the sales tax petition for Hamilton County. He's in the back tonight. If you haven't signed it, if you're interested in signing it, he will be at a table on your way out. And I do believe, is this the last week, Mr. Janis? This is the last week, 30 days, 39,000 signatures. That's a lot to ask. It's very, very hard. A couple other things for those of you, I've had several people talk to me about the penny over there on the wall and what it is. And I've got a little contest going on that. That's by the back door. Grab one of these, tell me what you think it is. You might win. So I had an opportunity to go to an event in South Carolina when I was down there last time. It was a TED Talks event. It lasted most of the day and they had speakers nonstop the whole time, 15 minutes. It's so refreshing to open your mind up to new ideas and to have a chance to hear what people have to say, because sometimes it's really easy when it's so dark outside and it's getting to be winter, just to kind of get stuck in your own head on what's important and what's not. That's why I'm so excited to have a chance to hear from 6 people tonight. And the rules are pretty straight and strict and forward, 15 minutes each. If there's extra time, the speaker can take questions. If there's no extra time, they can't. The speakers will be stopped at 15 minutes. The speakers are being judged on 6 or 7 different variables. We have 3 judges tonight. The winner gets $100. And more than that, we're just happy that they've taken the time to talk to us about something that they feel passionate about, which is great. And we're going to go in alphabetical order tonight. And what I'd like to do is to introduce the speakers. We're not going to go through their biographies. Those are online. You've seen those in the emails. And then we're going to start. So for the speakers, I'll be in the back. I'll have time cards that tell you when you've got about a minute or 30 seconds left. And that'll be your cue. You need to kind of stop. And you really need to stop when I tell you to. Or our judges will assess. What are we going to do? Assess penalty points, right? Right, judges? You guys are tough. So I'd like to just introduce the speakers and have them raise their hand, and then we'll start with the first one. Our first speaker is Karen Cartier right here. Our second speaker is Georgia Crowell right here. Our third speaker is Tony Krueger right here. Our fourth speaker is Nick Noel right here. Our fifth speaker is Jack Sinking right here. And Jack's sitting next to his 60th anniversary bride, right? Let's give them a round of applause. I think that's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool thing. I hope I get to 60. And our seventh speaker is a neighbor of mine, Dr. Will Sawyer, right there. Let's give him a round of applause too. So let's go ahead and I'm gonna get my timer out. I'll kind of signal when the time starts, and we'll pass the microphone.
Good evening. I'm here. I'd like to see a show of hands of who has ears to hear. Very good. Ears to hear. Just kidding. What I'm here to talk about tonight is that complex organ between your ears, your brain. The reason why it's important to me is because I know someone who has dementia and has been suffering from it for 7 years. Actually, I know more than one person who has either dementia or Alzheimer's disease. It's a very cruel disease that robs us of our memories. And I've learned some things by taking care of that person for a while, in addition to talking to caregivers, nurses, knowledgeable people on the subject. I've gone to Alzheimer's Association seminars. I've read books, articles, and as a technical writer for 30 years, I'm very good with research. I'd like to share some of the basic things I've learned, and they're things that anybody can do that don't cost anything, just requires a little discipline. And I'll be talking about 3 basic areas. The first one will be exercise, the second one will be nutrition, and the third one will be maintaining intellectual stimulation. Okay, first of all, exercise. I am serious. It's important to keep moving. You know why? Because the whole concept is keeping blood flow throughout your whole body and keeping oxygen going to your brain. It's paramount. And it's very easy to do, and it doesn't cost anything. You can walk every day. It's recommended to exercise 30 to 60 minutes a day for 5 days a week, from everything that I've read and learned. Walking is the simplest thing. If you're stuck inside, you can stretch, you can try yoga, you can try Pilates. None of those things costs anything, and they're very simple to do. Isometric stretching. You don't have to go to a gym to work out. You can just do what you can do at home. Very, very simple. Second topic, nutrition. And this is something that I've kind of been tuned into for my whole life, but I've especially learned some things in recent years from articles that I've read. It's best to maintain a diet that's low sugar. Okay, you hear that all the time. Why? Well, one of the main reasons is if you have an overabundance of sugar in your bloodstream, it creates little fissures and cracks in your blood vessels. Those fissures and cracks will get clogged up with cholesterol over time. Your little blood vessels will need to reroute and cause problems with circulation. People with circulation problems in their legs and their feet, a lot of that is caused by an overabundance of sugar. And we have sugar in so much of the food that we eat every day, and it's sugar that you don't realize is there. Salad dressing, so many things. Low sodium to maintain your blood pressure. Too much sodium gives you hypertension. Maintain a Mediterranean style diet from so many things that I've read, and that's really not that hard to do either. Fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grains. Drink lots of water. High fiber diet is the best, and it makes a huge difference. The high fiber diet is tied to gut health. Now, this is a little delicate to talk about, but this really makes a difference. Okay, gut health has to do with the bacterial balance in your intestines. Now, I'm going to talk about this. I had to cheat a little bit. I had to cheat a little bit because some of the bacteria names I wanted to make sure that I got right. Okay, the gut contains 70 to 80% of our immune cells. There is no good or bad bacteria, really. It's always a balance, a biodiversity between various types of bacteria in your colon. The enteric nervous system connects the gut to the brain. And this is more than 1 billion nerve endings. It's like a second brain. That's why it's so important. It can act independently from a human brain. Each of us has a different balance of bacteria. The gut produces vitamins for the body and supplies central nutrients. It regulates the immune system. Think about that. The gut synthesizes neurotransmitters, which for one thing means that 90% of serotonin derives from here, and that's the chemical that enables your good mood and it moves substance through the gut. It regulates appetite and your sleep cycles and blood clotting. All of those things are so important, and it's all related to your gut health. 50% of dopamine is created in the gut. For one thing, it is sometimes called a chemical messenger. Dopamine plays a role in how we feel pleasure. It's part of our unique human ability to think and plan. Now, here's another tip that not many people know about, and I hope this is new information for you. Garlic. Has anybody ever tried eating raw garlic? And I'm seeing some, yeah, I'm okay, good for you. I'm seeing some discouraging looks out there. It's not an easy thing to do, and you don't want to do it on an empty stomach. Here's a little story of history that my father-in-law told my husband and I some years ago. Think about this for a minute. In Europe, during the plague, people were dying in droves from the plague. And the people working in the cemetery, the undertakers, were taking the bodies and burying them and pouring the lime over them and handling the bodies. Somehow or other, they weren't getting sick. Why not? They were drinking garlic, they were poor, and they drank garlic wine, which was the poor man's drink back then. The garlic wine was preventing them from getting sick. So my husband and I went around and looked for garlic wine, and we couldn't really find any. But I read some more, and I learned that raw garlic, not the powder, not the capsules, not the ground up stuff you buy in the jar, not the ready-made stuff, the actual raw garlic, break off a clove, pop it in your mouth, but don't bite yet, and take a little swig of, a little drink of red wine or a little juice if you prefer. Take the drink, and while the drink's in your mouth, chew up the garlic and swallow it down. You can get it down and it's not so bad. Or you can mince up the raw garlic in a little glass of orange juice and get it down that way. But you get the garlic in you, and it's antiviral, antibacterial, anti-inflammatory. It thins your blood, and there are whole books written about the benefits of garlic. But the raw garlic is the one you want to go for. I don't know how many people here, and this was an EmpowerU class not too long ago, coffee, plain coffee is a benefit to the brain. We learned that here from a very reliable source. The American Heart Association recommends not smoking and reducing alcohol consumption to a minimum because it's related to coronary disease. And drink lots of water. Stay hydrated. Don't ever let yourself get dehydrated. If you're becoming thirsty, you're already dehydrated. So remember, just plain water. If you put a little lemon in it, you get the little extra vitamin C. But lots of water is always good for you. Okay, the third thing I want to talk about is intellectually challenging yourself. I'm doing it right now, and it's fun. You can do it so many different ways. Okay, puzzles, reading more challenging material. Get out there and talk to people. The best way to do that is to think of the other person. Think outside yourself. If you're meeting someone for the first time, ask them to tell you about themselves. And that's a good way to get to know people. Don't ever let yourself become isolated. Music is another very important stimulation. There was a documentary called Alive Inside that came out in 2014. My husband and I went to a theater in Mariemont to see it. The documentary shows evidence of Alzheimer's patients who are enabled to listen to their personal favorite music from when they were in their younger years, like teens to 20s in particular. And it enabled them to communicate again where they were shut off previously. Communicate for a while. That music was so stimulating to their brain, it made that huge difference. And don't you know, certain songs, when you hear them, they can instantly take you back to a certain place and time in your memory. So enjoyable. Music is very, very important. So to summarize, exercise, nutrition, and intellectually challenging yourself. All of those things are equally important, and they're all easy to do. Keep doing them. Keep moving, keep going, keep eating well, keep intellectually challenging yourself. I wish you the best. Do what you can do when you can do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Any questions for Karen? We've got a few minutes. If anybody has one, there's one right here. If you'd wait for the microphone, please.
Hi, I'm Diane.
Hi, Diane.
I had read in a couple places where they seem to have found a correlation between people who take high dose of statins for long periods of times and dementia. Have you read or heard anything about that?
I have not read specifically about that. I will say that what I've read and heard, the more you keep natural, the better off you are in general. I can't speak specifically to the statins.
Any other questions? Right here.
If we can't stand raw garlic, what about baked garlic? You know, when you put the whole clove in the.
It tastes good, but you lose some of the nutrients that
Yeah.
way.
Okay.
Mince it up real small, put it in some juice and drink it down. Red wine is good, but if you don't want to drink the alcohol, juice is fine too.
We're going to ask Karen to make some of that for one of our next EmpowerU sessions. Right here.
That's what I was going to ask about is garlic, because when you have garlic in a jar that's ground up garlic like that, I've always heard that's really good for you, but you're saying that's not really good for you?
Oh, I'm not saying it's not good for you, but the best is the raw stuff.
So it's just not as good as
It's
the
not, I
rest
don't
of
think
it.
it's as good as the raw garlic. Yeah.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Let's thank our first speaker again, everyone, Karen Cartier. Our second speaker is Georgia Crowell.
Attachment on the beadler. Try this.
Okay, great.
I'm speaking tonight, good tax, bad tax. Actually, our tax system needs, thank you. Our tax system needs an overhaul. Our government is bloated. We need to pay our debts. Our wealth is going for the wrong uses. What we need are better taxes, but not more taxes. Not all taxes are bad, but all income taxes are. Any worker, no matter who they are and what kind of work they do, needs to receive the full value of work. It's unfair for the government to come in and take money that they have worked for. It's complicated. Income tax is complicated. It's easy to be manipulated. And I like to compare it to they have to go to get a CPA to do their taxes a lot of times, most times, even though they keep trying to say that it can be put on a postcard. Well, that's not true. Nothing is that easy. It's like having to dig your own grave when you're about to be executed. It can be replaced with consumption taxes. Now, there are better consumption taxes than others. But a good tax, a good consumption tax, encourages the economy, and it can be flexible. It's easier to manage and collect, and it can be at the time of sale or at the manufacturer. The sale tax is universal sales, but the manufacturing tax can be individual items. For instance, well, and a really good tax on consumption is the fair tax, which if you don't know about it, when EmpowerU first started, they had a session on it. There's several books written on it, and it's still there, and we're still waiting for someone to take up the cause on it. Now, as I say, there's the consumption tax. There's two kinds. One is a general tax at the time of sale. That's okay, but I prefer to have one embedded and be specific. For instance, the tobacco tax. As we just heard by our last speaker, tobacco and alcohol are not good for you if you don't want to get Alzheimer's, dementia. But tobacco tax, it's still there, nobody's outlawing it, but it's taxed. And this might be an incentive to get people to lead a better life. I think also, in addition to that, those two taxes, we should consider taxes on junk food. Now, junk food can be almost anything, but the worst junk food is soda pop. And any kind of soda pop, the chemical soda pop, and also the sugary soda pop. For instance, we also, not only do we not tax it, or if we do tax it, it's not very much. We also even give it to people who are on food stamps. Now this is ridiculous. Here we're giving it to people who can't afford decent food, and they're filling up on junk food. And then they get sick because their diet is bad, and they get sick, and we pay their medical bills. Now they say we don't pay medical bills for everybody. We want universal medical insurance. We do. We just don't advertise it. And if people don't have money, like people on food stamps, they're paid for. Now, in addition to these kind of taxes, I think we have to realize that people in general in the United States and the world are sick, and the soil is sick. Our oceans are full of plastic. Our rivers are polluted. The soil can't absorb water and carbon. Now, and this is due to poor agricultural practices. I think we need taxes on petroleum. This is the junk food for the soil. And yes, we do need energy, and it's very popular, and a tax on petroleum, as we found out, is definitely unpopular, but it can be controlled and regulated with taxes. And we can get solutions with this, but the tax will help to get to solutions. The problem is that the solution is now political. Republicans are in denial. Democrats are autocrats. They think everything should be done their way or no way. We should remember our history. During the Civil War, part of the reason for the Civil War, which isn't publicized anymore, but it was worn out soils, and this was causing problems with the political people moving out west, and they were fighting over this. We also had the Dust Bowl. Now in the Dust Bowl, we did make remedies for that, but in the years since then, the remedies have been forgotten. Now, there is too much, it used to be too much dust in the air during the Dust Bowl. Now they call it carbon. We can't see it. It's there. It shouldn't be there, at least not in the amount that it's in there. Carbon is carbon is needed. It's needed in the air. It makes plants grow, but there's too much in there. And when it gets too much, our soils should be absorbing it. They're not. And they think that the reason is because it's been overused, chemicalized with chemical fertilizers and pesticides, herbicides. Some scientists know this, and some farmers have taken up making changes. You've heard, perhaps you have not heard, but I've heard things like holistic, no-till, diversity, beyond organic, regeneration of soil, using perennials, and grass-fed animals. We should tax, on the other hand, we should tax chemical fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, plastics. These are just a few of the suggestions that could be taxed. We love plastics. I like it too. It's very convenient, but there's too much of it. And if you ever traveled on the seacoast, it's washed up on our beaches, but on deserted islands, the beaches. And why am I talking about this in connection with the petroleum tax? These things I mentioned are examples of derivatives of petroleum. They take so if we tax petroleum, we also are taxing these indirectly, and they should be taxed directly also. I would like to say a lot more on this. There's whole speakers that are available to talk about this if you don't know, and lots of books are being written about this. But if we work with nature, we can win, and win through taxation. This is all I feel like I have time to say. I'm worried about making sure that I say everything I would like to say that I think is major importance. But if anybody would have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Any questions for Georgia? Any questions? Let's thank our second speaker. Thank you, Georgia. And Georgia's right. We did have a class on the fair tax, and I've promised her, it was 5 years ago I learned, that we'll have a class next semester about it. It's very interesting to learn about. Our next speaker is Tony Krueger. And I had promised Tony I'd have a monitor up for him tonight, and I'm sorry I forgot to do that. So he's a little bit of a disadvantage, but I know he'll give a great talk. So let's give us just a minute to get your PowerPoint going, Tony, and we will be ready for you. And that goes up too, Tony.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hold on.
That's the,
Press the button.
testing.
There you go.
Okay, got it. Constitution. Okay, my talk is on Cold Civil War. Are we in one? Are the progressive socialists ready to fight or fighting the constitutionalists right now? Next slide. How do I do that? Okay, in the past, we had a two-party system, we still do. The parties used different means to achieve a common constitutional end. That end was sometimes contentious, but the policy of the majority was accepted. This right here, Constitution. Everyone has one, right? That's the original Constitution. Next slide. In the present, we still have the same two parties. They use the same different means, methods, arguments, okay? The liberal argument, the conservative argument, but the ends are different. Instead of this Constitution, the socialists want this one. This is 2,800 pages. Okay? Woodrow Wilson called it the living Constitution. Okay? So when you have different end objectives, the vitriol is going to be much greater. Next slide. So Professor Charles Kessler wrote that liberals would have to radicalize or wither away. And so they could either pick socialism or identity politics. Well, they've picked both. We are in a true socialistic movement by them. But is this really all that contentious? How did this thing start? Well, let's look and see how contentious. Hillary, in October, said, if the impeachment provision in the Constitution of the United States will not reach the offenses charged here, then perhaps that 18th century Constitution should be abandoned to a 20th century paper shredder. She's basically denying the Constitution unless it serves her purpose. Woodrow Wilson was even worse. In 1911, he said, if you want to understand the real Declaration of Independence, do not repeat the preface. So the principles stated on the first page, the preface of the Declaration, throw them out. They're not valid. He also said, does the doctrine of the Declaration of Independence still live in our principles of action? We are not bound to the doctrines held by the signers of the Declaration of Independence. So the principles, we don't have to follow them anymore. So if there's an erosion first of the principles, it's a lot easier to erode the Constitution. So the foundation, Declaration of Independence, that being discredited allowed the Constitution to do this. Okay, the professor says there are 5 potential resolutions to this conflict. First of all, we could change the political subject. If there's a catastrophic challenge to the country, we could have unification of the parties. Next, we could change the political ideology. One party could persuade significant portions of the country to embrace its view. Next, we could reinvigorate federalism, return power to the states, reduce the size of the federal government, and promote the return to the framers' Constitution. Next, we could have secession, where socialist states could decide to secede from the Union. Lastly, we could have a hot civil war where those being oppressed would just say, why follow any law? There is no law. Let's just have revolution. So let's say what will happen here. Well, the catastrophic scenario seems kind of unlikely and undesirable, possibly ineffective. How effective was 9/11 in bringing the country together? 2 weeks? Now, World War III with China? Yeah, we'd work together. That's not a solution. Next, an ideology change where political parties that we have right now that are roughly equal. Look at the results from last night. Some people winning by just 1,000 votes here or there, a few tenths of a percent. So what would we have to do to have a significant shift? Somebody's going to have to start winning 70-30 or 75-25, or else there's not going to be any acceptance. When it's equal, one's not going to accept the other. We could have secession. Okay, that would be great. We would become an also-ran with China. If we break up, we don't have a chance of beating China. We can have a hot civil war. That'd be great. Go around shooting everybody. So those are the 5 scenarios that Kessler proposed. And he said the one he preferred was federalism. And the problem is he doesn't think that we can return to federalism, that we're too far down the road. That's where I disagree vehemently with him. I believe there is a way, and I think we can find it. So thanks to Thomas Jefferson, I hold these truths to be self-evident. Okay, the Declaration of Independence has been desecrated. The Constitution has been misinterpreted and structurally damaged. Washington is broken and corrupted. The founders predicted this corruption. They actually predicted it in the last days of the convention and unanimously provided the solution. Washington is not the solution. It will not fix itself. The U.S. Constitution, Article 5, with a state-initiated convention process is a solution. Okay, let's look at some of the facts. In modern times, and I'm considering the start of the Balanced Budget Amendment push as being the modern times, 37 states have endorsed the Article 5 Convention of States process by approving one or more Article 5 applications. But at this point in time, we need to address many problems, not just a balanced budget. And this would require more than one amendment topic. The Convention of States project can address this constitutional pressing issues, especially the balance of power, by restoring federalism. Next, please. So, in conclusion, the states have the authority under Article 5 to restore federalism by unilaterally amending the Constitution. Washington cannot stop them from doing it. I repeat, Washington cannot stop them from doing it if they hold a convention of states. The time, in my opinion, is to act now. Okay? However, there are obstacles. It's an arduous process to get 34 states to agree on the same topic for the proposed amendments. It's got to be the same topic. Congress could try to divert the states' efforts by competing proposals, and they did it with the balanced budget amendment. A convention of states for the purpose of amending the Constitution has never been held. But you'll notice I said for the purposes of amending the Constitution. Many interstate conventions were held in the early days. Holding a convention was well known and understood by our framers of our Constitution. It's not rocket science. This topic is different. Now we're talking the Constitution. That's the only situation as far as that goes. But there are opposition groups that fear negative outcomes to their interests, okay? Okay. There are those that fear a COS success that would result in smaller government, less socialistic programs, and lessening of their power. So Hillary openly is against it, and so is George. There's also a fear by some that there could be a catastrophic problem that would come out of the convention. It could inflict critical damage to the Constitution and ruin our form of government. The Eagle Forum and the John Birch Society are ones that fear that. So let me try to make a distinction between fear and risk, because this is at the heart of one of the oppositions, both of them actually. You're at 30,000 feet in an airplane. Both engines conk out. You're dead. No doubt about it, right? So, can it happen? Yes, it can happen. Are you afraid? Or are you talking to your neighbor, watching a video, or sleeping? That's what I'm doing at 30,000 feet. Why? Why isn't it? Why aren't you white-knuckled? Because the risk is minuscule. And that's the difference between fear and risk. You have to take each risk and consider its probability and the severity of it and how to prevent it or how to detect it. Okay? So, George and Hillary, they are justified in fearing a successful convention of states. The risk for them is high because the COS will be successful. The process is simple, safe. We have intelligent, patriotic delegates who will be selected, resulting in a viable amendment proposal or proposals. Okay? Now, Eagle Forum and the John Birch Society, they're really not justified in fearing a disastrous convention of states. The fears have minuscule risk of ever being realized at the convention itself because the process is very simple and well controlled. But furthermore, detrimental amendment proposals, because it's only proposals that come out of a convention. There's nothing settled, just proposals. Those proposals would have to pass in 38 states. Now that's the same ratification process that we've used for all 27 amendments. But do you think that 38 states are going to adopt a communist constitution or something? No, that's not going to happen. What do the citizens think about the Convention of States? Well, we've done polling. We've done 12 states individually. Likely voters, overall support by party was 75% Republicans, 56% of Democrats. Majority of Democrats and 63% of, quote, others are in favor of a convention of states.
Thank you,
Okay.
Tony. Thank you very much. Let's give Tony a round of applause, everyone. Thank you. And that was Tony's last slide, so he was done. Sorry. Let's just rearrange here for a minute. Thank you. Our next speaker is Noel.
Thank you. A few of you might be wondering what my subject is when I say the war against Black Americans and freedom. Are you able to hear me okay on this? Push the button? Oh, okay, no, okay, that's it, okay, we got it. All right, and you know, actually what I'm wondering is how I can talk about this in a short time that I have, because I just spent 3 years and 200 pages putting this in writing in a book. And, you know, I can't cover all of that, so I'm only going to be able to cover a little bit of it, but I'm going to try to make it something that's worthwhile. In this country, we've had, this is the greatest, the United States is the greatest country that's ever existed for the freedom and rights of its citizens, the individual rights of its citizens. And the reason for that is because our founders, from the very beginning, recognized that freedom and rights can't be granted by government. Those can only be granted by God. And the purpose of a government that they founded, and they decided that they would found, it would be a government that would secure the God-given freedom and rights of all Americans. And when they did that, a lot of people don't understand this, but what they planned to do was to secure the freedom and rights of all Americans, including Black Americans who were then slaves. And that was done in a way that isn't as visible as people think that it should be, maybe. But what we have to look at is the history that they came from. You know, we in the United States, the way this started was we had most of the people that came here were people who came here from England and Europe. Are you hearing me okay? Is that all right? Okay, most of the people came here from England and Europe to escape the elite ruling classes and kings that owned everything and controlled everything. And they wanted to come here and they wanted to start new lives for themselves using their own hard work and energy. And they did that, and they got plots of land, and they worked those plots of land themselves and with their families, and some of them started businesses. And but then a smaller group, a much smaller group of people came here and became an elite ruling class in America. And what they did was they were rich men who came here with a lot of lesser men, they considered them common men. And they came here and acquired huge tracts of the best farmland in some of the southern colonies. And they came here and they acquired that land, and they brought these men with them who would be subject to them, who would work for them. And when they got here, what they did was immediately very quickly start buying slaves from slave traffickers. And they eventually bought enough slaves that half the population in their colonies was slaves. So they had half slaves and half common white men. And they got control of this and maintained control of it by white supremacy. What they did was they made the slaves treat all white people as superiors, and the white people that they had there, a lot of them knew that slavery was not good and wasn't right, and so the slave plantation owners, in order to get past that, they said, well, these people are inferior. This is an inferior race, and they're not the same as normal people. They're just an inferior race, and they need to be taken care of, you know, and they need to be clothed and fed and you know, controlled, and but they're just not the same as you, and so they did some things to prove that. And we didn't learn about this until actually Frederick Douglass wrote about it after he escaped from slavery and exposed the methods that they used. But what they did was they never let the slaves know who their fathers were. They kept them from knowing when their birthdays were, and a lot of simple things like that. They kept them from learning how to read and write. And so they made them ignorant as much as they possibly could. And then they say, well, see, that proves that these people are inferior. They're inferior to you. And, you know, they manufactured false evidence. And so when it came time for the American Revolution, some of our founders were people who had been born into this culture of slave owners. Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, some of the others had been born into this culture, but they agreed with most of the Americans that had come here and started their own farms and everything. They agreed with them, and they said, this is not right. You know, what we need to do is we need to establish a country to secure the freedom of all Americans, including these black slaves. They're men too. They need to have their freedom secured too. And so what they did was the Declaration of Independence actually talked about the fact that all men are created equal, and that a legitimate government is established to secure the rights, the freedom and rights of all men. And so they had to go about this when they fought the American Revolution. The lot smaller number of slave owners actually participated and helped win the revolution. And so they participated in this. And when it came time to form a government, the government they formed by the Constitution was the one that they described in the Declaration of Independence. The government that they formed was a government designed to secure the freedom and rights of all. And the way they did that for the slaves, they said, first of all, you know, we're not going to put slavery into the Constitution. We're not going to even put the word slavery in the Constitution. We're not going to do anything with the Constitution that tends to make people believe that one man has a right to own another. And what we are going to do is we're going to actually punish slavery. And they did that in the Constitution. They said we're going to, the states had members of the House of Representatives based on population, and votes in the Electoral College based on population. And they said, what we're going to do is we're going to count only 3/5 of the people who are not free in your state as part of your population. So as long as they're not free. And so you're being punished by having fewer representatives and fewer electoral votes, as long as you have people that are not free. Number two, Congress is going to be authorized to abolish the international slave trade 20 years after the Constitution is ratified. So the slave plantation owners decided that they wanted to become part of the United States because they wanted to protect their own freedom under a common national defense. That was the way to do that, was to have a common national defense. And they went forward and they ratified the Constitution to protect their own freedom. But as soon as they did everything they could to keep from having the Constitution have equal freedom, produce equal freedom for the slaves. And so they went on for the 20 years they had before the international slave trade was abolished. And what they did, instead of reducing slavery, which would have been the logical thing to do, they increased the number of slave states and did everything they could to make slavery more of what our country was about. And so 40 years after the Constitution was ratified, they formed an anti-Constitution party. The Anti-Constitution Party eventually became named the Democratic Party. And the purpose of it was to prevent the Constitution from enforcing equal freedom and rights. And so from that day forward, we had a constitution and we had an anti-constitution political system. And that's what started our politics. And immediately, the Whig Party said, okay, we're going to oppose them. And so they started this party to oppose them, but they got dominated by the Democrats completely. And they compromised with them in every possible way. And so finally, the people who were against slavery said, we're going to have to form another party, and they formed the Republican Party. And that's where we got the Civil War, was they formed the Republican Party and said, we're going to stop the spread of slavery. And they did. And, but you know, our political system is not just something that's like, okay, well, we have two different parties saying, this is how we think we should protect the freedom and rights of everybody. And this is how we think this should be done. That's what we're given to believe, is that what we have is two different political parties, and that they just both have different ideas about how we should protect the freedom and rights of everybody. But that's not what we have. What we have is we have a constitution, and then we have a political system that's against the Constitution. And so we look at this and we say, okay, well, from the early 1600s, there were slaves in this country. Black Africans were taken as slaves since the early 1600s. And if you look at if you go walk into any city today, Black Americans are not treated the same today as whites. They're just not. And you can talk all day about, oh, we have equal rights and the laws all say that we have this right and we have that right. But they're not treated as equals. They never have been, and they never will under the system we live under until something changes. And, you know, there's been a back and forth battle, but the elite ruling class that founded the Democratic Party still is the elite ruling class. Hillary Clinton, George Soros, and other members are people that are part of the elite ruling class. And I'm not talking about a conflict between just Republicans and Democrats, because most Democrats are just normal, ordinary people who have been deceived by the ruling class, the elites of the ruling class. And this is never going to change until we can change something basic about it. And finally, with the 2016 election, with Trump coming in, we had a disruptor that wanted to follow the Constitution, and so that's why the revolution is going on right now against Trump, because he wants to follow the Constitution, and he says that's what he'll do. And are we close to the end here? Okay. So, you know, but what he's done is to do things that have made Black Americans have more jobs, and things have improved for Black Americans, but it's improved for the fact that they're able to do things for themselves. And that's not what the ruling class wants to have happen. They want to keep us divided because keeping us divided produces votes that keeps them in power. The votes keep them in power. And so what we have right now is we have a battle where false proof is being manufactured against Trump because they don't want Trump to be the disruptor here to this political system that's been going on for all this time. And there have been a lot of changes, but you know, during those changes, a lot of what's changed is the lies that are being told. And that's been the most powerful weapon that the ruling class has, is lies. And you know, the same lies are being told now that were told back in 1860, right before the beginning of the Civil War. They said that the Constitution says that black people are only worth 3/5 of a white person. Well, that's not true at all. That had nothing to do with it. It was, we're only going to allow you to have 3/5 of the people who are not free counted into your census. And they said, well, the Constitution says you have to return slaves to their owners. Well, it didn't say anything like that. What it said was that people that are indentured servants that have contracts that owe service, they can't escape from that by running to another state. It didn't have anything to do with slavery. And there are just constant lies that you hear people quoting these lies today. The same lies are being told over and over and over again. And, you know, okay, so what we need is we need a change. We've got a change started. It's not about a matter of Trump being, you know, a great messiah or something like that. He's not. He's just a disruptor that's disrupted this political system that's really been formed to destroy the Constitution, to overcome the Constitution. And so, you know, what we need to do is we need to recognize what's going on and recognize that, that we need to follow. If we follow the Constitution, things would change for the better. They would change for the better.
Let's give our fourth speaker a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, we've got Jack Sinking.
Can you hear me in the back? I always ask that question because I was given a talk one time, and I don't know, I've been talking a minute or so, and the guy in the back held his hand up. And I said, yes, sir, you have a question? He said, no, I can't hear you. I said, I'm sorry, I'll try to speak up. And a few minutes later, he raised his hand again. And this went on for quite a while. Finally, a guy in the front row stood up, turned around and said, sir, I can hear him real well, and I'd pay to trade places with you. So anyway, but that is my name. And the first thing I'd like to do is I'd like to thank Dan and Betty for putting this program on. I think it's a great idea. I have learned a lot. And what I'm going to talk about is the myth, to do away with the myth about the gun violence. Do we have anybody in here that is familiar with gun violence, or do you think we have gun violence? Good, because we don't. Now, I'm going to prove that. I have a couple props in here, and I've asked Dan, I've got a pistol, and I've got a clip and some bullets. And there's the clip. I wanted Dan to pull this out to show you that cannot possibly function. I've got a wire tie through the barrel and through the clip. So, Karen, I can't talk without notes because my Alzheimer's. But anyway, okay, what is this thing? It's an inanimate object, and by itself, it won't function. It takes a human being to put bullets in that clip. It takes a human being to put that clip in the pistol. It takes a human being to rack that slide and put it around in the chamber. It takes a human being to aim that at a target, and it takes a human being to squeeze that trigger. Other than that, It's an inanimate object. It just won't work. I would be willing to offer $1,000 to anybody in this room that can come up here and put a couple of bullets in that clip, and then put that clip into the gun, rack the slide, get it ready to go. I would even let you take the wire ties off, okay? Any takers? No, it's impossible. So why do we have this thing going around on the news 24/7, 365? Do you remember, we don't need guns for mass murders. Anybody in here remember Timothy McVeigh? Okay, it's been almost 25 years ago. He killed 168 people. I'm sorry, he killed, 168 people. He injured 680 others. I don't remember them clamoring about background checks on fertilizer and kerosene and stuff like that. There was a fellow in Nice, France. He was at some national parade. He drove his pickup truck through the crowd of people. He killed 86, injured 458 others. President Kennedy was shot and killed on November the 22nd, 1963. None of these incidents did they blame the gun or the fertilizer or the truck. So why do we have a gun thing going on? It's the media. And I've said you can't legislate morality. Yeah, you can, but you cannot legislate evil. It just doesn't work. And what are our leaders doing? They're talking about magazine capacity, background checks, common sense gun laws. Magazine capacity. They don't want me to have a 30-round clip, but I can have multiple 10-round clips. When I fire that 10th round, I can eject that clip. I can slap another fully loaded clip in there in less than 2 seconds. So that doesn't do any good. Background checks, we already have background checks. Common sense gun laws, I've got a common sense gun law for you. If you take a life of somebody, I don't care whether it's a knife, baseball bat, a gun, or whatever, you die, period. But how many criminals do you know, or these wackos that do these things, they're not going to obey the laws. I don't care how many you pass. It's just fruitless. And we had one of our Democratic nominees for presidency just withdrew. But before he withdrew, he made the statement, if he was elected president, he would send the authorities around to our doors to confiscate our weapons. Now, that sounds like something that the communists would do, or Hitler. It's ridiculous. One of the things, do you know how many, there's like 330 million people in this country. Any guess how many guns we have in this country? 357 million. That's a bunch. And that's one of the reasons the Japs never invaded the United States of America. They knew that the citizens were armed. And our sheriff, he lives 8.8 miles from our house. If the bad guys are coming to beat down my door, the police aren't going to do me any good. They arrive after the problem. So can we do anything about it? In my opinion, no. But there is something that we might slow it down by doing, and that is doing something with the media, the news media. When I was a kid growing up in the late 40s and 50s, we had 3 TV stations. They aired from 6 a.m. to midnight. From midnight to 6 a.m., you had nothing but a test pattern on all 3 channels. And today, I mean, it's ridiculous. When the Parkland, Florida shooting took place, I'm watching the 10 o'clock news. This guy comes on. That's all he talked about for 60 minutes, less the commercials, but that's all he talked about. He showed movies of children crying and screaming and running from the building. And then the bad part about that is 11 o'clock, here comes another newscaster. What did he do for the next 60 minutes? Same thing, same thing. So in my opinion, we have to do something about the news media. It's in the paper all the time. I got 3 articles here. They were all in November or in October, talking about the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, talking about the anniversary of this shooting and that shooting. All we're doing with the news media is glorifying these idiots. We got to stop airing that. Maybe we ought to go back to 3 channels and from 6 a.m. to midnight. Maybe that would help. Now, in just this Sunday's paper, I don't know if you saw it, gun grabbers are misleading fellow Americans. And that's a fact, in my opinion. Who are the gun grabbers? I think it's our leaders in Washington. They talk about the clips, eliminating clips and the gun laws and all this stuff. I think all they're wanting to accomplish is to get us to believe that they're doing something about the problem. You can't do anything about the problem. Now, I've got some copies of this. I don't have enough for everybody, but maybe we got a copying machine upstairs. But anyway, I just highlighted some of these things. FBI lists murder victims by weapon from 2004 to 2018. It turns out that slightly over 2% of 14,123 homicides were committed with rifles, 297 out of 14,000. A total of 1,500, or 11%, of homicides were committed by knives. 443 people were murdered with a hammer, club, or some other bludgeoning instrument. 672 people were murdered by a hand, foot, or fist. More homicides, I like this guy. More homicides could be prevented by advocating for knife control, hammer control, and feet and foot control. And guns were far more readily back in yesteryear. Back 25 years ago, I had a federal firearms license when we lived in Indiana. So I know the gun laws. And you could go into a Sears, you go to a pawn shop, a gun dealer, and you could put your money down and take your merchandise with you. Today, it doesn't work that way. And we had a recent president come on television and talk about getting guns over the internet. You might be able to order a gun over the internet, but you cannot pick it up until you go to a dealer who has a federal firearms license, fills out the 4473 form, does a background check with the FBI, and if you pass all that, then you can come take your gun. But other than that, it just doesn't work. Now, his parting shot was, and boy, this is scary. You have to wonder what these people have in store for us when they eliminated or want to eliminate our means for defending ourselves. You know, I've been fooling with guns since I was probably 12 or 13 years old. I'll never forget my first gun lesson with my dad. You guys probably remember the old Red Ryder BB gun. It held several hundred BBs. And it didn't work until you pull that cocking lever up to put a round in there. So one winter day, I'm out playing in the woods. I came home. And boy, I made sure that thing wasn't cocked. I squeezed that trigger because I knew Dad would quiz me on it. So I put it on the back porch, went in the house. Where's your gun? It's on the back porch. Is it loaded? No, sir. Bring it here. I took it into him, and he goes, and you could hear the BBs rattling. He said, it's loaded. Go unload it. So all I've got to say is we've got to get with these people. We've got to write letters. I don't know how I got a letter or an email from Jerry Nadler. Jerry Nadler, as you may know, he is chairman of the Judiciary Committee. He's a U.S. rep from New York. And I answered his email, and I didn't think to get copies of it, but you're welcome to look at it. Told him basically the same thing we're talking about here. It is impossible to stop something like that. I'd give $1,000 if anybody can stop that from hitting the floor. These things happen before anybody realizes it. So I think I'm done. I hope I've gotten my point across. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer.
Any questions for Jack? We've got a couple minutes. Hold on just a second, please. Ken, would you speak into the microphone?
I'm sorry. What were those statistics again? How many guns do individual gun owners like you?
Well, the last time I checked, which was today, there's 357 million guns in this country. And there's just a hair under 330 million people.
It's a lot. Any other questions for our speaker? Hold on just a second.
I volunteer a lot with the, I don't know if a lot of people heard of it, but the Citizens on Patrol, these police departments have, and they go over training, how they're trained to react to situations. And one thing I didn't hear you mention was what's out there on TV. Everything on TV I see, somebody's got a gun in their hand. And that leads me to believe we're training these people to think that's the norm. So I just wanted to put that in there.
And I think all we're doing is glorifying these people, making martyrs out of them. I mean,
Let's thank our fifth speaker, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Jack. Let you put your props away. Our sixth speaker is Dr. Will Sawyer. Welcome, Dr. Sawyer.
Thank you very much. So my topic, let's see, chronic care of addictive disease, okay, is I would say probably my real request is that all physicians should be able to prescribe methadone for the chronic disease of substance use disorder, if you will. And it's something that I'm a doc. I've been practicing medicine for 33 years, and I've seen the impact on families and communities. Things have just changed dramatically. And it's addiction. And here's what's also changed is the understanding of addiction. So recently the American Society of Addiction Medicine came out with a new definition that tried to capture it better. I'm going to read it specifically. So addiction is a treatable chronic medical disease involving complex interactions among brain circuits, genetics, the environment, and an individual's life experiences. People with addiction use substances or engage in behaviors that become compulsive and often continue despite harmful consequences. So there's a lot of issues that are referred to as addiction. Sugar, caffeine, nicotine, shopping, sex, money, power, alcohol, opiates, tranquilizers, and you all can add some more, I'm sure. So it's not just drugs, and this is what we've sort of come to believe it's just the drugs. And what we as docs have seen, there's a huge public health issue going on. And in fact, Tom Sinan, who's a chief in Newtown, he's been very involved with the whole opiate use disorder and heroin issue and heroin task force, that we're not treating it correctly because it is a public health issue. You can't, incarcerate people out of it. You can't tell them no to stop this. So and then in fact, there was an editorial in the newspaper today, but I read this before coming over thinking this. He is somebody who's way ahead of his time in thinking this, but we still need to get the word out from a public health perspective and personal physicians. In other countries, the family docs in Australia, in UK, specifically can prescribe medications for addiction. You don't have to go to a specialized clinic only, as we've designed here in the US. So further studies about addiction, Nora Volkow, who's a psychiatrist who's head of National Institute of Drug Abuse, they do quite a bit of research on addiction, and they're the ones who've looked at the brain chemistry and has proven that sugar causes the same neuroscientific reaction or in the brain as opiates do. So in her example is obesity. The folks who suffer from obesity, everybody will say, it's just stop eating this, just stop doing this. And the answer is they can't. Those who have that addiction for sugar, you can't. It's very difficult because nobody would put themselves up for the abuse that people who are obese face, quite frankly. You talk about, biases and all and whatnot. Yeah, many people suffer through that. So we have to get beyond that it's not only drugs. There's many other issues that we face. Nicotine, caffeine, let's line them up, but there are treatments. Diabetes, folks who have that, they get treated. If they fall off the wagon, they eat something wrong, they have a hypoglycemic reaction, they end up in the ER, we don't stop treating them. And that's what we're doing with folks who are addicted to opiates. If they overdose, they relapse, we say that, no, you shouldn't do this, and that we need to treat this chronic disease. There are 3 treatments. Naltrexone, which you've all heard about, which reverses overdoses, and you can get injectable forms monthly. There's buprenorphine, which was created in the 90s and is what's pushed and there's a lot right now. And that you can be certified, docs can be certified, even nurse practitioners and PAs are now certified to prescribe it. But methadone, which has been around since 1937, a German scientist created it. World War II was a big deal because morphine was not available, and methadone has been prescribed for pain since then and for treatment of addiction. In fact, in the 50s and 60s, when there was heroin epidemics in the UK and New York and parts of the US, they were using methadone for treatments. And then what happened in the 70s, they were in the war on drugs, and then there were some regulations that Congress came in and said, no, the practicing physician can no longer prescribe methadone for addiction. We have to begin to regulate it more, which is very unfortunate. Other countries have not done that, but we have. And we have a huge problem today. What's happened, as you're all aware, is in 2000, 2002, they created these methadone clinics, which you go every single day to buy a single dose of methadone that is between $15 and $40 a dose for people who are having problems or on the fringe, they're trying to recover, and you're picking their pocket when methadone itself is available orally, and it's very inexpensive. And I, as a doc, and all other docs who are licensed can prescribe methadone for chronic pain, just not addiction. So what I would love to do and love to see is that the federal regulations change. It's a simple change in the FDA, which could be done that would allow physicians, family docs, internal medicine docs to prescribe methadone to their patients, that we call it a medical home, for the chronic disease of addiction, because it is an epidemic. It isn't going away. The companies who've created these opiates did this knowingly, and they started off saying they were non-addictive, but now we all have heard about the problems that have gone on. So to get us out of this, as Simon has said, it's a public health issue. We need to approach it differently. The Institute of Medicine in 1995 said we need to allow docs to all prescribe it for addiction, methadone. And the NIH, National Institute of Health, had a panel that recommended it as well, but no one's listening up at the FDA. So one of the pushes I would ask everybody to do is, we've all been affected by addiction in one way or another in our communities, families, and friends. It really crosses all socioeconomic lines. It's just incredibly disheartening to see when there's a very simple treatment for the chronic disease of addiction, which is lifelong. It's not for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. It's like diabetes. Diabetes is a lifelong disease. So I guess my thought is I'd like to leave you all with the understanding that addiction is not, the substance use disorder is not a choice. It's involving genetics, environment, brain health, and we need to approach it on a more comprehensive basis to allow physicians who are trained to treat chronic diseases to continue to treat their patients with a chronic disease and use the resources instead of the limited access we have right now, because the relapse, the incarceration is not the choice, as again, as Tom Simon, the chief in Newtown, agrees. So I would like all of you to contact your legislators and say, let's do it different. Portman is on the edge a little bit, and I think he can really do something if we nudge him a little bit. So thank you.
Any questions for Dr. Sawyer right here? Thank you. An editorial comment about Senator Portman. I was in Kenwood Town Center on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. Ran into him, was going to go up and say a few words to him, and when I went up to approach him, he put his sunglasses down. I didn't know if that meant anything or not, but here we go. Here's the question.
There is a Generation X or millennial generation that grew up with Adderall and Ritalin, and I'm wondering if you associate any of that with the opioid addiction of many of these previous adolescents who are now adults.
So opioid addiction is similar to nicotine. If you never tried it, you never would know. Now, the problem is adolescence is about a time of experimentation. Every one of us who've had an adolescent knows if we could get through it, it'll be great. But what they're doing is pushing our buttons. It's a time of exploration, and for some, and there's lots of issues, genetics, environmental exposure, and all that add up to what are they trying, whether it's alcohol, others. But no, there's not been any specific other medications that have led you there, because there's a, it's like the gateway drug idea. If you have tried an opiate by a doc or by however you did it, and you go, oh my gosh, this is heaven. Houston, we have a problem and needs to be addressed, because just telling them to just saying no doesn't work. But does not lead to it, does not lead to opiate addiction.
Here's a question right here. We have time for one more.
I have a question about children that are born from mothers that have been addicted. And they do try to wean them off. But are they basically, for the rest of their lives, susceptible?
So they will give them naltrexone or Narcan because they go through withdrawal when they're born. But they are not addicted by design from then on, but they need treatment over period of time in the newborn period. But the question I guess you may ask is that, are they predisposed to addiction?
Yes.
And the reality is, addiction's a human disease. Here's what it sounds. At some level, there are many who believe every one of us have some element of addiction. We just don't know what it is. Working, sugar, money, power. I sort of, what I've done historically, which is what I do with patients, I go, well, what's your addiction? And they look at you like, oh my God. But it's an obsession. It's something you can't give up, and most are not destructive, but.
Well, my daughter at 46 adopted a 1-week-old baby, and the baby was born from a mother that used drugs. So we were wondering if that would continue. It took them several weeks to wean the child off. But is that child, well, you're saying we're all susceptible to it, is what I hear you saying. It's just that, we don't take that step knowingly anyway.
Right. Exactly. And that's one's adolescence. And this is where you'll hear people talk about, don't let adolescents be exposed to different drugs or medications and whatnot, because their brain is still developing. And
Let's thank our last speaker tonight. Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. Thank you for coming. Appreciate that. Just a couple things I want to run through with you before we announce the big winner tonight. Remember, if you want to sign the Hamilton County sales tax petition, Mr. Janice is out there. You can feel free to sign that if you'd like to. We had an incredible class here. I don't know if it was our last class or not, Betty, on a couple people spoke about federalism, and that's the laws between the states, the federal government, the cities, the counties, et cetera. And it was just a real treat to hear our speaker from the Federalist Society. You can watch that online if you want. It was quite a talk that he gave. I also wanted to let you know, Tuesday night, when we have this lady from Florida coming up to tell us about the tragic death of her daughter, with her will be coming a coach who will be talking about how to empower people if they're attacked by somebody. It's the perfect opportunity if you have a child, if you have somebody in high school, if you have somebody in college, to bring them and arm them with a few weapons to allow them to protect themselves. So I encourage you to do that if that applies to you. So the winner, all 6 speakers were judged on the following categories. The person had an impact on me. The speaker spoke to me and made eye contact. Body language, was the person confident? Content of the material, well thought out, flowed well. Voice, clear and understandable, knowledgeable about their subject. And the winner of the $100 check is Jack Sinking. Congratulations. Yes, you do. It's the fair tax for sure. So this is our first TED Talks event, and we hope to do them all the time. And I just really appreciate all 6 people who stepped out and kind of went off the ledge the first time and helped us with this. Tell your friends about it. Tell them to get ready. They've got a few months to prepare. And thank you all for coming. And remember, tomorrow night, we last semester talked about World War II in depth. We've got one of our great speakers here tonight. Tomorrow night, we'll be taking you back to the saga of Vietnam. And it'll be a very interesting class. And I look forward to seeing you at an upcoming event. Thank you.